name's James Mathers. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the nonprofit educational group that I run. It's called the Digital Cinema Society. This effort started about a dozen years ago. We got a little frustrated that there was so much misinformation going on about digital. For example, one of the manufacturers was saying, with digital you don't have to light anymore. And as a cinematographer, that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. So we decided to do a little documentary. We got interviews with some filmmakers that were working in digital at the time, including James Cameron, George Lucas, Steven Soderbergh, Alan Davio, ASC. But the problem was that almost before we could finish it, it was starting to become obsolete. So then we decided to start this ongoing effort called the Digital Cinema Society. We've now got about 6,000 members located all around the world. Our group has never been about advocating to shoot digital over film. It's always about finding the right tool for the job and helping filmmakers keep up with not only technology, but also the business end of showbiz. After 12 years of service to the industry, we feel that now is the time to leverage the success of the Digital Cinema Society with a new effort to be known as the Digital Cinema Show. Our mission of empowering filmmakers with the knowledge of cinematic tools and techniques remains. However, this content will now be curated and formatted into episodes of a regularly scheduled web series. We will cover not only the latest in cinema technology, but also subjects such as film finance and distribution, as well as techniques to craft an effective motion picture narrative. In addition, we'll present profiles of filmmakers and industry luminaries, along with visually illustrated tips on both the art and science of motion pictures. Our premiere episode features just one of the many engaging interviews we collected during this year's Cinegear Expo. We sat down with Andy Maltz, the Managing Director of the Motion Picture Academy's Science and Technology Council, to discuss their efforts to implement ACES as an industry color management standard.
So ACES is all about three things. It's about color management, it's about digital image interchange, and long-term archiving of digital motion pictures.
We also caught up with industry pioneer Larry Thorpe, a senior fellow with Canon USA, at the last CES convention. He had just been honored with the Charles F. Jenkins Lifetime Achievement Award from the Television Academy. Larry was there at the very beginning of digital cinema and shares a bit of that history with us.
It actually started with digital Betacam. George was experimenting with digital Betacam. He wanted to see where had digital capture come. He was very impressed, except it was lacking two things. It didn't have his 24 frames, and it didn't have high enough resolution.
Our final segment of episode 1 features renowned visual effects expert and cinematographer David Stump, ASC, who joined us to discuss his new book entitled Digital Cinematography.
Once the cameras started to appear that could make good pictures in the digital realm, it quickly became obvious to me, and I told everyone who would listen at the clubhouse and at IATSE and everywhere else that I went, guys, if we don't embrace this and learn about it, we're either going to be driving the bus or under its wheels.
Continue watching to view the entire episode or use any of the separate links and jump ahead to segments that may be of particular interest to you. In either case, thank you for joining us for the premiere of the Digital Cinema Show. We welcome your input, so please follow us on Vimeo, YouTube, or our Facebook page. And if you would like to support our efforts, please also consider joining the Digital Cinema Society. Membership's available to anyone, whether you can afford it or not. It's always free to students. We suggest a $30 annual contribution from those who can afford it, or a lifetime membership at $100. This episode of the Digital Cinema Show brought to you with the support of Bertoni Visuals, a creative hub where digital stories begin. This is James Mathers. I'm at Cinegear 2015, Cinegear Expo. And I've got Andrew Maltz here, Andy Maltz. He's the Managing Director of the Science and Technology Council for the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Did I get all that right?
You got it all right. It's nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
What do you do at the Science and Technology Council?
So my job is to wrangle the Academy's and science work. So we pay attention to the last word in the Academy's name. So that means everything related to technology history, current activities in technology, education, both for the public and for professionals. And then we do a lot of advanced technology and research work, and that's where projects like the Academy Color Encoding System come into play. We do a lot of work with solid state lighting. So from the move from tungsten-based lighting to LED and other solid state lighting technologies, the whole balance of our system had changed because the spectral power distributions, if I can get a little technical, of these solid state lighting devices is completely different than daylight or tungsten or fluorescent that we understand how to use. So we've done a lot of work unpacking what the issues are. We produce some research tools, something called the Academy Color Predictor, which is a free iPhone, iPad app that lets cinematographers get some predictability back into color reproduction with these new light sources. So that's one area that we work in. We also do a lot of work in digital preservation or preservation of movies that are finished digitally. We publish two reports, the Digital Dilemma 1 and the Digital Dilemma 2, that outlines the issues of preserving digital motion pictures for the long term. As I'm sure you know, it's a lot harder to keep those bits around for a long time than it is for film.
Where do you put it all?
Exactly, and it's more expensive and it's just more complicated. And then, of course, there's the Academy Color Encoding System, or ACES.
That's what I've been hearing a lot about lately. Well, what is the function of that?
So ACES is all about three things. It's about color management, it's about digital image interchange, and long-term archiving of digital motion pictures. So if you think about it in terms of what we used to have with film, we had standardized infrastructure. SMPTE had a lot of standards around film, aperture, sprocket size, even reel cores were standardized. And the color reproduction, capture and reproduction aspects of the film system were, we'll say, de facto standardized by Kodak, Fujifilm, AGFA. You as a cinematographer and the labs and everyone involved in the imaging chain knew what they were getting. The spectral curves, response curves of the film were published. Well, when we moved away from film to digital, yes, we got all these great new benefits, all these great tools, all this flexibility, and we completely lost the standardized infrastructure that we had previously.
So film has had 100 years to come up with these standards, but now it's like the Wild West with digital. It's all happening so quickly.
That's right. So anyone with a computer and a little knowledge of programming can essentially invent their own imaging chain. And that's largely what happened. You've heard the term snowflake workflows, right? So every workflow for every movie can and usually is different. And at the end of the movie, just like a snowflake, it evaporates and goes away, or it turns to mush, right? So the idea behind ACES is to get rid of this variability and essentially the laboratory function, the digital laboratory function, and the energy that goes into movie making, and television shows for that matter. Rather than recreating the lab with every production, you can take that energy and put it into the creative aspects of your production.
So what does that mean to a cinematographer like myself?
Well, it means your light meter will work again. All right? Instead of some of these legacy workflows where you have to run into the video village or go to the tent and look at the monitor, you can light by eye again. It brings that kind of predictability. ACES brings that kind of predictability back to production for a cinematographer. The choices you make on set for look management, the ASC CDL values that you set on the set, ACES nails down the transportability of those numbers into the DI suite. So the look you determine on set is transportable and portable to the DI facility, and it also predictably, reliably goes into editorial and the visual effects.
And visual effects are so many happening, and it's a lot of different houses all around the world sometimes. So now they're all speaking the same language. Is that essentially how it works in visual effects?
That's exactly how it works in visual effects. Everybody is using the same set of calibrations. They're using the same viewing transforms that are, meaning the show LUTs, if you will, for the display technology that they are using in their facility, for the viewing environment in those facilities. All of those pieces come with ACES as a system. You don't have to do invention for every new show.
So I've been hearing about this for a number of years, but you just published ACES 1.0.
That's right. So ACES as a concept and a project has actually been in development for a little more than 10 years.
Oh, 10 years.
So there were a number of pre-release versions that we put out to get some field experience where the engineers and the color scientists and the practitioners said this is what we think we need, and we built that and we put that out in the field starting around 2011. About 3 years of field experience, and we took all of that experience and knowledge and adapted, updated the system, and completed version 1 of the system. So you could actually argue that version 1, ACES 1.0, is actually version 4. Right?
But calling it 1.0 might suggest that there's going to be a 2.0 someday.
That's likely.
So it's still developing?
Yeah, and in fact, we have developed a versioning system within ACES. The expectation is that the system will grow. There won't be a version 2 for a while, so we're staying with version 1 and getting some experience and adoption with that, and we'll take what we learn from that and build it into version 2.
It must be a big part of your job to get everybody to sign on to the program. Camera manufacturers, post-production houses, everybody needs to use this if it's going to be of value.
That's right. So the adoption effort is something that the Academy has taken the lead on. It's a very difficult thing to change how people work. People get comfortable with their own workflows. In this industry, there's not a lot of risk-taking from a technical side. From a creative side, you want risk-taking. That's how you get some of these brilliant movies and television shows. But we have to change essentially the behavior of the industry from all these independent, snowflake, roll your own workflows to a standardized platform. So we've done a number of things in that regard. Probably the biggest thing we've done is we've created something called the ACES Logo Program. It's designed to communicate to filmmakers that an ACES logoed product will provide a predictable and consistent color management experience. Okay, it doesn't mean it'll solve all your problems for you. It just means if you start with equipment that has the ACES logo, you'll know what you're getting. Very clear specifications from the Academy on that. So equipment manufacturers that want to achieve the ACES logo, earn the ACES logo, they have to do some very specific technical things, ranging from how they present ACES settings in the user interface, to implementation of the key transforms, to implementation of working color spaces, but it's all very, very specific across a number of product categories.
No secret sauce, or at least they put their secret sauce on top of standard.
That's right. So there's no need for secret sauce in a color management system. Now, do you want custom looks? Absolutely. And there are structures within the ACES system to enable custom looks. If you want something proprietary, that's fine. But if there's anything proprietary that's going to go into the archive, whoever's providing this proprietary transform has to provide the information you, the filmmaker, need to recover your creative intent, and ACES provides the framework for that.
So we're all speaking the same language.
That's right.
Where can somebody find out more information?
So we have a website and a Twitter feed, and we'll be creating a YouTube channel with videos, but the place to start is oscars.org/ACES.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
This is James Mathers for the Digital Cinema Show. I'm here at CES 2015 with my old friend Larry Thorpe. Larry is a true pioneer in the area of digital cinema. He was one of our first members of the Digital Cinema Society, and he was around at the very birth of, when they took video and started making movies. I'd like to ask him to tell us about that and about an award that he's getting, Charles F. Jenkins Award from the Television Academy, Lifetime
Achievement, Engineering Achievement Award. Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. It is an extraordinary honor.
Larry, can you tell us about those early days? I think George Lucas was involved. You might have been at Sony at the time.
Yes, well, it's actually started with digital Betacam. George was experimenting with digital Betacam. He wanted to see where had digital capture come. He was very impressed, except it was lacking two things. It didn't have his 24 frames, and it didn't have high enough resolution. But in terms of other imaging parameters, he was very impressed. He urged us to continue, and of course shortly afterwards we brought out the first high-definition 2/3 inch camcorder, the HD Cam, which we then brought back to George, and now we really had his attention. But of course, he still said, I don't see my 24 frames. What about that? And that started a journey. And I have to pay tribute to a remarkable engineer we worked with many years ago, Charles Pantuso, who wrote the first paper proposing 24 frame. It was presented at the SMPTE in the 1980s, and that triggered some discussion with Sony at the time. And then with further meetings with George Lucas and ILM, we embarked on a quest to build a system, camera, 24 frame camera, studio recorder, editing, display, the basics of an imaging system, and that started the whole thing.
Now it just keeps getting better and better, and nowadays you're at Canon, and Canon was largely responsible for getting into the bigger sensors that we have now. Can you tell us some of the milestones?
Well, I think the major milestone, of course, was in 2008 when we brought out that 5D Mark II DSLR with video in it, happened to have a full frame image sensor, and that just electrified an awful lot of people. And we built that to provide web video to the folks who shoot stills, AP, Reuters, never ever thinking that the cinema world would get interested in it. And of course that launched an odyssey within Canon. We got so much attention from that some serious discussions in-house. We realized our core technologies of image sensors, optics, image processing, we pretty well had the ingredients, and we said, well, let's go for broke and do a full digital cinema system. And that's our Cinema EOS system.
Well, the cameras just keep getting better and better. Can you tell us about some of the highlights?
Well, milestones, of course, were improvements we made. Jumping to 4K was a milestone. More recent milestones, jumping to wide color gamuts. And we now have the ITU 2020 wide color gamut in our current Cinema EOS C500. New dynamic ranges, of course, we're always exploring that area.
So in our short careers, we've seen SD, HD, 4K, and now I'm seeing 8K around the show. What do you see for the future?
Well, I see 4K still has a way to go, and I'm specifically talking about the living room. To fully gain the benefit of 4K, you simply have to have the screen substantially larger than what we're seeing here at the show. 84-inch screen, 4K from 9 feet, the average viewing distance, you do not get 4K. You have to let the screen grow substantially. Remember, 4K is 4 times what we're typically seeing in cinema, in the print film, which hovers in and around the HD type of resolution. And we're dealing with very big screens there. So talking about anything beyond 4K for the foreseeable future in the living room, I don't see it yet. I don't see 8K in the living room. I see it in cinema and large screens and public venues and all that sort of thing. And it's inevitable it will come. But I think 4K has to earn its way into the hearts and minds of the consumer.
Well, thank you so much, Larry. Again, congratulations on your award. We're so proud to have you as a member of Digital Cinema Society.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Now, the reason that you're all here, Mr. David Stump, ASC, and anytime that you can get a chance to hear David and hear what he has to share, I think it's a great opportunity, and you must all know that because this is a very well-attended event. So, David, tell us everything we want to know about digital cinematography. We've got about...
There really is a lot to know. I will say that. If I had had any idea how deeply I was going to go into it when I started writing this, I might have chickened out. I started investigating digital as a phenomenon, I'm going to say around 1999 and 2000 when the F900 started making its entree into cinematography. As a visual effects cameraman and as a visual effects supervisor, that was kind of what gave me the earliest entree into the digital world. So I was curious and fairly knowledgeable about digital well before we started thinking about using digital cinema cameras. Before we started thinking about using HD cameras to do cinema work. Once the cameras started to appear that could make good pictures in the digital realm, it quickly became obvious to me, and I told everyone who would listen at the clubhouse and at IATSE and everywhere else that I went, guys, if we don't embrace this and learn about it, we're either going to be driving the bus or under its wheels. And so for my diligence in that area, the ASC gave me the title of chairman of the camera subcommittee with a mandate to educate our membership, excuse me, and to uplift the group and to try to bring them into the digital realm, into the modern era. And I have to say, sometimes it was easy and sometimes it was screaming and kicking. And there were a lot of really interesting and really cool experiences along the way. I spent a lot of time with Viper cameras in the early days, trying to figure out workflows and explain why a really ugly-looking gray-green signal could really be useful if you knew how to wrap your head around it. I went through learning the Panavision Genesis when it first came out. And I think I was scheduled to do the first Genesis movie out of Canada, and 2 days into the shoot, a real estate crash happened that caused us to lose all of our funding and shut down, and we all had to come back to the US. So I missed my chance to be the first one to finish a movie on the Genesis. It was really an eye-opening experience to be privy to so many really cool development meetings in the development of digital cinema. At the ASC, in my committee duties, we hosted conversations with every camera builder everywhere in the world. We had Sony in, we had Panavision in, we had Red came in. We spent a lot of time with Arri. We've spent a lot of time with Canon subsequently, and Panasonic, and all of the manufacturing community. So it's been really interesting to watch the development of the single sensor camera, the digital cinema camera. We had a huge bunch of the engineers from Panavision who came in one afternoon to the ASC clubhouse, and we all sat down at the boardroom table, probably 6 or 8, maybe 9 or 10 of Panavision staff, and a dozen or so cinematographers. And we were there to talk about the next generation camera from Panavision, which later ended up being the Genesis, as we all know. And Nolan Murdoch, once we gavelled the meeting to order, Nolan Murdoch started off the meeting by saying, he reached down into his briefcase and he pulled out a lens and he sat it on the middle of the boardroom table, and he said, this lens is Panavision Primo 50 millimeter serial number 1. Does anybody want to guess how much that lens cost us? And there were a couple of people who sort of made a laughing, joking guess. Were you at that meeting, Bob, that day? And Nolan said, well, I'll tell you guys, that lens cost Panavision $1 million. And he let that soak in for a minute or so, and then he reached down into his briefcase and he pulled out another lens, and he sat it next to the 50, and he said, this is Panavision 35 millimeter, serial number 1. Anybody want to guess what that lens cost Panavision? And somebody with a little bit of wisdom in the room said, we get it. Stop. And he said, okay, so now we can all safely gather that our next camera is going to be a 35 millimeter size sensor. Because with this closet full of lenses, it doesn't make any sense to build anything else. And for year after year after year, we continue to have those kinds of meetings with the hardware community. There was a great meeting with the Sony engineers from Atsugi, and they cleverly brought in pads of paper that were lined with the Sony logo at the top, and they put a pencil and a pad of paper in front of every one of the ASC members who was at the meeting. Probably 20 or 25 of us at that meeting. And when we gavelled the meeting to order, the head of the design bureau said, "Gentlemen, in front of you is a list of the features that we're going to incorporate into our next camera." And I think it was Fred Goodich in the back of the room who said, "But it's blank." And Yasu said, "Yes, it is, and we're going to fill it in tonight." So all of these experiences over the years were not wasted on me, and they were filed away in various dark recesses of my brain for the occasion when I stupidly agreed to take this on, naively. And it took me, I think it probably took me the better part of 5 years, 5 or 6 years collectively, to assemble all of the pieces that I was going to use for the book. Because I had written fairly significantly over the years on various blogs and in papers, white papers for the ASC, and different writings for other people. And once I collected everything that I had done and sort of looked at all of that body of work as a whole over the course of 3 or 4 years, I realized I had a pretty good start at doing a book. So then I determined that what I should really do first is what one of my college English teachers taught me to do, which is to do a thorough outline. And I have to say, doing an outline on something that is changing as fast as digital cinematography is like mud wrestling an anaconda. And the outline ended up taking me vastly more time than I ever dreamed that it would. Because every time I got through it to the end, I had to go back and change everything that had changed in the meantime. And as I did, I kept thinking of things to add. And there was this little voice in the back of my head that kept saying to me, "Oh no, don't add more work." But it was inevitable. By the time I had finished, so many other odd things had happened to me in my shooting life, my day job, that I kept adding pieces to the puzzle. There was actually originally going to be a 3D chapter in the book, and even my publishers cried uncle at the end of the process. They said, "Stop writing. We don't have any more room." When they asked me how much I thought I would turn in, I looked at their delivery spec, which is double-space Microsoft Word in a specific font with the photos in line, roughly sized to the size that you want them. And I read the spec and I said, I think I can turn in 300 to 350 pages. With the 3D chapter in the finished manuscript, as I turned it in, I was at 1,101 pages. And the very first conversation that I had with my publisher after they received it via email over my Google Drive began with the words, "Jesus Christ." In the book I tried to break it down very logically. So there are chapters on what digital is, how sensors work, color, a little bit of a history of color that was very helpful. I did workflow chapters. I did a post chapter. And one thing that I very strongly felt was that there needed to be a good solid lens chapter. So I went pretty deeply into lenses because ultimately cinematography is mechanically about two things. It's about a sensor in a little dark box, and then it's about the lenses that you put on the front of that. And lenses are enormously expensive. We're at a point now where they're enormously important. Yes, they're expensive, but they're important to cinematographers because we're about to dive into an era of 4K and who knows, maybe even beyond. And not all lenses are created equal. And every script, every movie, every idea has its own sort of suggestion of what kind of lenses it ought to be shot on. Some projects beg for CinemaScope. Some projects beg for a nice soft look, something that's kind to the aging actors and actresses. Some things really want to be sharp and snappy and right on you. Some colors want to be vivid and contrasty and saturated, and other movies want to be a nice little soft look and shallow depth of field. So I tried to get into lenses enough to show my readers a good wide variety of lenses. I even briefly considered going as far back as Baltars and the old small Cooks. And I'm still thinking about that, but I'm also reminded what my publisher said about stop at 1,000 pages too, so. There are good prep chapters. There's a good prep chapter, there's a good workflow chapter, there's a post chapter, there's an absolutely finishing chapter that I told you was inspired by the story about a deliverables list. There was one other story that inspired that chapter, and that was when a friend of mine wrote to me. It was a very good and very competent cameraman, and he said that he had gone to a festival somewhere with his HD-Cam SR tapes, and he couldn't understand why they couldn't play his tapes in a theater. And when I told him, well, do you have a DCP of them? He said, no, what's that? So I did a little bit of an introduction to what a DCP is and how we deliver movies from the lab to exhibition in theaters, because I discovered there was a dearth of knowledge about that, and there weren't even very many places you could go to find out how those mechanics worked. And I also tried to cover on-set workflows and the tools of color management and color correction, like our ASC CDL and the ACES movement, Academy Color Encoding System, and how to troubleshoot finishing your movies in an efficient and beautiful way, the easiest way from set to screen. I think I did a fairly good job. I think I'll let you guys tell me how I did after you've read the book. The book seems to be doing fairly well, and I'm proud of it.
I have one last important question. Where does somebody get your book? Besides that they might win one tonight.
Amazon.com sells it. It's also available through the publisher Elsevier, anywhere that you can buy books electronically. The ASC Press is carrying it. Yes. Thank you for the reminder. I was getting there. The ASC Press carries it as well, and you can get it at the clubhouse. And I think it might be coming to bookstores, which is not usually something that Focal Press do. They don't usually sell out of brick and mortar stores. But I think I've reached a threshold of sales with them where they're willing to shoot the dice and try putting it in stores. So in their world, in Focal Press's world, 1,000 books is a big success. And the publisher called me up to inform me that they were going into a second printing as they were starting to fill the orders for the book, because I had 1,200 pre-orders. So I think I'm doing okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David.